That road belongs to this community now. We're installing permanent security infrastructure to protect property values from unauthorized rural traffic. That's what Marcus Whitfield announced while standing in his signature pink dress shirt and black dress pants, pointing at the massive steel gate his construction crew was welding across my private access road, the same road my family had used for 3 generations, and the only fire department route capable of reaching his precious Meadowbrook Estates development. The morning air sizzled with the blue-white flash of arc welders striking steel, the acrid smell of hot metal and burnt paint mixing with diesel exhaust from 2 idling flatbeds, while Marcus supervised from his air-conditioned BMW, clipboard pressed against his pink dress shirt like a shield against the property rights he was systematically destroying. The metallic screech of 80-foot steel beams grinding into concrete footings made my teeth ache, while I calculated response times, water pressure requirements, and the federal penalties for blocking designated emergency access routes. I'm Fire Chief Daniel Rodriguez, 32 years fighting structural fires and coordinating emergency response, and I stood there watching Marcus's crew install their electronic fortress while every fiber of my professional training screamed warnings about the death trap they were creating. What Marcus didn't know, while he admired his $2 million monument to suburban paranoia, was that my private road wasn't just a convenience. It was Emergency Access Route 47, the only path wide enough for ladder trucks, the only route with adequate turning radius for emergency vehicles, and the only access point that didn't require crossing railroad tracks during freight delays. His gate wasn't just blocking my family's historic right-of-way, it was violating International Fire Code sections 503.1 and 503.6, creating criminal liability that would make federal prosecutors very, very interested in his negligent endangerment of 347 families. The sweet irony was that Marcus's security upgrade would become Exhibit A in federal court when prosecutors charged him with willful obstruction of emergency services, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud through deliberately compromising fire protection systems required by his own development's policies. In 6 weeks, his pink dress shirt would be replaced with orange prison clothing while federal marshals seized his gate, his assets, and his freedom for blocking the fire access route that could mean life or death for his entire neighborhood. What would you do if the HOA spent $2 million blocking your family road and creating a fire trap that could kill hundreds? Where are you watching from? Drop your state below, because this story will teach you exactly how emergency access laws work, which federal agencies prosecute obstruction of rescue services, and the specific legal strategies that turn HOA security theater into federal prison sentences for pink dress shirt tyrants who think property values matter more than human lives. After 32 years of emergency response, racing toward burning buildings while families screamed for help, I'd earned my quiet retirement on the 40-acre homestead my grandfather had carved from Virginia wilderness in 1924. The property sat on a ridge overlooking the Shenandoah Valley, connected to State Highway by a gravel road that wound through hardwood forest my family had maintained for generations. The morning air smelled like wood smoke and wild honeysuckle, carrying peaceful sounds of birds and wind through leaves instead of sirens and radio chatter that had defined my professional life. My plan was simple: restore the 1890s farmhouse, teach my grandson Miguel how to split firewood and maintain forest trails, and finally build that workshop where I could craft furniture instead of coordinating disaster response. The road itself was a masterpiece of practical engineering, 20 feet wide with proper drainage and turning areas every quarter mile, built to handle everything from horse-drawn wagons to modern fire apparatus. My great-grandfather had surveyed the route himself, following natural contours that provided adequate grade while avoiding wetlands and steep slopes. The Virginia Department of Transportation had designated it Emergency Access Route in 1967, recognizing its strategic importance for reaching the valley's growing residential development. Every county fire truck, every ambulance, every emergency vehicle had used this road for decades because geography and federal regulations made it the only compliant route meeting IFC requirements for apparatus access roads. Then Meadowbrook Estates sprouted on adjacent valley floor like a suburban infection. 300 McMansions with manicured lawns and enough HOA regulations to choke a law library. The development's primary access crossed railroad tracks at a single controlled crossing, creating bottlenecks during normal traffic and complete barriers when freight trains blocked emergency vehicles for 20 minutes or more. The county fire marshal had specifically required my road to remain accessible as alternate emergency access, a condition written into their original development permits, insurance policies, and federal compliance documentation. Marcus Whitfield arrived in Meadowbrook Estates like a corporate virus wearing expensive clothing and delusions of authority. Recently retired from some executive position where he'd apparently spent decades perfecting the art of solving imaginary problems with expensive solutions, Marcus wore his pink dress shirt and black dress pants like a uniform of suburban conquest. During HOA meetings, he spoke in buzzwords about comprehensive security solutions and premium community protection, code language for spending other people's money on projects that fed his ego while creating problems that didn't previously exist. His campaign promises included eliminating unauthorized access and establishing controlled perimeters, military terminology for a man who'd never served anything more dangerous than corporate shareholders. Marcus's obsession with my road began during his first month as HOA president, when he declared my family's century-old right-of-way a security vulnerability that compromised his community's exclusive character. He saw emergency vehicles, my maintenance activities, and my occasional use of the road as invasions of his suburban fortress that demanded expensive technological solutions. The fact that this road was legally recorded, federally designated, and functionally necessary for emergency services meant nothing to Marcus's vision of gated community perfection. He wanted a barrier, a monument to his authority, a $2 million statement that his HOA could override property rights, emergency access requirements, and basic fire safety. The gate project began with surveys that violated my property rights, followed by construction permits that ignored emergency access requirements, and culminated in installation that blocked the only IFC-compliant route for fire trucks serving his entire development. Marcus supervised every phase from his BMW, pink dress shirt pressed crisp as his arrogance, completely convinced that expensive security theater could overcome federal law, county ordinances, and the basic physics of emergency response that would soon destroy him completely. Marcus's gate installation was a masterclass in criminal negligence disguised as community improvement, a $2 million monument to suburban paranoia that violated every principle of emergency access I'd learned during 32 years of fire service. The steel barrier stretched 80 feet across my road, equipped with electronic locks, surveillance cameras, and enough concrete footings to anchor a suspension bridge, all while Marcus stood beside his BMW in his pink dress shirt and black dress pants, clipboard pressed against his chest like armor, while directing operations with the delusional authority of someone who'd confused homeowner association power with actual law enforcement. The sweet irony was that every weld, every concrete pour, every electronic component was creating federal evidence of willful obstruction that would make prosecutors fight over who got to handle his case first. The gate's electronic system was particularly impressive in its criminal stupidity, requiring HOA-issued transponders, manual override codes known only to Marcus and his board, and backup power systems specifically designed to maintain security during emergencies when emergency access becomes life-or-death critical. Marcus had spent $2 million creating a death trap with electronic locks, then programmed it to maintain maximum security when people needed rescue most, his pink dress shirt gleaming with satisfaction while he tested systems that would become evidence in federal court for reckless endangerment charges carrying decades in prison. My professional response was methodical and devastating, beginning with a formal inspection that documented every code violation while Marcus watched from his air-conditioned BMW, pink dress shirt pressed crisp as his arrogance. I contacted County Fire Marshal Rebecca Torres, a no-nonsense administrator who'd spent 20 years enforcing codes that keep people alive instead of making HOA presidents feel important. Chief Rodriguez, this is textbook violation of International Fire Code sections 503.1 through 503.6, she confirmed after reviewing my documentation, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen what happens when emergency access gets blocked. Emergency access roads cannot be gated without approved override systems, and those systems must guarantee immediate access for emergency vehicles. Marcus just created criminal liability for every fire call delayed by his security theater. Torres initiated formal enforcement proceedings while I documented response times, turning radiuses, and hydrant access that Marcus's gate had systematically compromised. The first test of Marcus's death trap came at 3:47 a.m. on October 15th when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 83-year-old widow living on Meadowbrook's far end, suffered cardiac arrest while her husband frantically called 911. County EMS responded within 6 minutes, arriving at Marcus's gate to find electronic locks engaged, override systems requiring HOA authorization nobody could provide during the emergency, and backup power maintaining maximum security during minimum life safety capability. Marcus had spent $2 million creating a death trap with electronic locks, then programmed it to maintain maximum security when people needed rescue most, his pink dress shirt gleaming with satisfaction while he tested systems that would become evidence in federal court for reckless endangerment charges carrying decades in prison. My professional response was methodical and devastating, beginning with a formal inspection that documented every code violation while Marcus watched from his air-conditioned BMW, pink dress shirt pressed crisp as his arrogance. I contacted County Fire Marshal Rebecca Torres, a no-nonsense administrator who'd spent 20 years enforcing codes that keep people alive instead of making HOA presidents feel important. Chief Rodriguez, this is textbook violation of International Fire Code sections 503.1 through 503.6, she confirmed after reviewing my documentation, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen what happens when emergency access gets blocked. Emergency access roads cannot be gated without approved override systems, and those systems must guarantee immediate access for emergency vehicles. Marcus just created criminal liability for every fire call delayed by his security theater. Torres initiated formal enforcement proceedings while I documented response times, turning radiuses, and hydrant access that Marcus's gate had systematically compromised. The first test of Marcus's death trap came at 3:47 a.m. on October 15th when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 83-year-old widow living on Meadowbrook's far end, suffered cardiac arrest while her husband frantically called 911. County EMS responded within 6 minutes, arriving at Marcus's gate to find electronic locks engaged, override systems requiring HOA authorization nobody could provide during the emergency, and backup power maintaining maximum security during minimum life safety capability. The delay cost 12 precious minutes while paramedics contacted dispatch, dispatch contacted the fire marshal, and the fire marshal threatened Marcus with federal charges if he didn't open his electronic fortress immediately. Mrs. Patterson survived, but barely, and her medical records would become evidence of Marcus's reckless endangerment that federal prosecutors would use to destroy him completely. Special Agent David Martinez from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit coordinated federal response with surgical precision, recognizing that Marcus's gate represented systematic obstruction of emergency services that warranted federal prosecution. Chief, blocking emergency access to residential developments fits federal definitions of reckless endangerment and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, he explained during our secure briefing, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd prosecuted domestic terrorists. If people die because fire trucks can't reach burning buildings, Marcus faces federal charges for negligent homicide. His gate isn't just an HOA violation, it's potential mass casualty facilitation disguised as community security. The FBI's involvement transformed Marcus's security upgrade into a federal investigation targeting organized criminal activity that threatened hundreds of lives. Dr. Evan Reed's forensic analysis of Marcus's HOA finances revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise, showing how he'd systematically embezzled community funds to build his personal monument while enriching family members through inflated contractor invoices. $400,000 stolen through shell companies and kickback schemes, Reed reported, while spreading evidence across my kitchen table, the morning light illuminating financial crimes that would make federal judges reach for maximum sentences. Marcus used fake security assessments to justify unnecessary spending, then laundered money through his brother's company while residents paid for their own surveillance system. The embezzlement wasn't just theft, it was systematic fraud that had funded the very barrier now endangering the people Marcus had robbed. Marcus's response to the medical emergency revealed his complete disconnection from reality and human decency. Standing in his pink dress shirt at an emergency HOA meeting to blame EMS for inadequate planning, criticize Mrs. Patterson's family for not requesting pre-authorized emergency access, and suggest that medical emergencies should be scheduled during normal business hours when HOA staff could facilitate gate operations. The meeting was recorded by 3 separate residents, creating audio evidence of Marcus's callous disregard for human life that federal prosecutors would play for juries who'd convict him before lunch. His pink dress shirt had become the uniform of someone who'd weaponized suburban security against his own neighbor's survival, and every word was being documented for the federal case that would destroy him. The county attorney filed formal charges against Marcus for willful obstruction of emergency services, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud insurance companies through deliberately compromising required fire protection systems that had been conditions of coverage since the development's original construction. Insurance companies serving Meadowbrook Estates discovered their policies required guaranteed emergency access through approved apparatus roads, conditions that Marcus's gate had deliberately violated, creating liability for wrongful death claims that could bankrupt his HOA and personally destroy every board member who'd approved his death trap. Marcus's $2 million gate had become a federal crime scene that would cost him everything he owned and decades of freedom he'd never recover, while his pink dress shirt became evidence of the suburban terrorist who'd forgotten that emergency access laws don't negotiate with HOA authority. The devastating test of Marcus's death trap came during a November thunderstorm when lightning struck the Henderson family's home on Meadowbrook's eastern boundary, igniting roof shingles and threatening to spread through the subdivision's interconnected architectural design that made every house vulnerable to rapid fire spread. County Fire Department responded with Engine 12 and Ladder 7, arriving at Marcus's gate to find electronic systems powered down by storm damage, manual overrides requiring HOA authorization that nobody could provide during the emergency, and backup generators programmed to maintain maximum security during minimum life safety response capability. The delay cost 18 critical minutes while flames spread through 3 additional homes and endangered 47 families who couldn't evacuate because Marcus's security system had trapped them inside their burning neighborhood, creating exactly the mass casualty scenario federal prosecutors had warned about. Fire Captain Michael Torres led the response team that finally breached Marcus's gate using hydraulic cutters and controlled explosives, creating emergency access while Marcus stood in his pink dress shirt screaming about property damage and unauthorized entry, the irony beautiful in its criminal stupidity. Marcus complained about gate destruction while his neighbors' homes burned because his security theater had prevented fire trucks from reaching hydrants, establishing water supply, and coordinating suppression operations according to standard protocols that had been developed through decades of fire service experience. His $2 million barrier had become kindling for the fires it was supposed to prevent, and every minute of delay was recorded by emergency services documentation that would make federal prosecutors very, very happy to prosecute him for domestic terrorism. The Henderson fire investigation revealed Marcus's gate had violated every principle of emergency planning that keeps residential developments from becoming death traps, with Fire Marshal Torres documenting how the barrier prevented establishment of incident command, blocked secondary apparatus positioning, and created evacuation bottlenecks that could have killed dozens during larger emergencies. This gate represents willful sabotage of emergency response systems, Torres reported to federal investigators, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen preventable deaths caused by similar obstruction. Marcus didn't just violate fire codes, he engineered mass casualty scenarios for personal ego gratification while stealing community funds to build his monument to suburban paranoia. The investigation report would become prosecution evidence showing Marcus's criminal intent to prioritize HOA control over human survival. Dr. James Wilson, a federal emergency management specialist who investigated domestic terrorism threats, analyzed Marcus's gate with professional horror that bordered on disbelief at the systematic planning required to create such comprehensive obstruction. This barrier system demonstrates systematic planning to obstruct emergency services during critical incidents, he testified during preliminary hearings, his analysis classifying Marcus's gate as domestic terrorism infrastructure. The electronic locks, override requirements, and backup power configurations specifically prevent emergency access during conditions when emergency access becomes life or death critical. Marcus has created infrastructure designed to maximize casualties while maintaining plausible deniability about his criminal intent. His analysis warranted federal prosecution under anti-terrorism statutes that carried life sentences. The FBI's financial investigation revealed Marcus's gate project had been funded through systematic embezzlement from HOA reserves, inflated contractor invoices, and kickback schemes involving his brother's security company that had no legitimate business experience or bonded capacity. Special Agent Martinez discovered Marcus had stolen $1.2 million from community funds to build his personal monument to suburban paranoia, using fake emergencies and manufactured security threats to justify spending that enriched his family while endangering his neighbors' lives. This isn't just obstruction of emergency services, Martinez explained during the federal task force briefing, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd prosecuted organized crime. This is racketeering using HOA authority to commit theft, fraud, and reckless endangerment that could result in mass casualties during future emergencies. Marcus's response to federal investigation was a masterclass in criminal stupidity that would make defense attorneys consider early retirement. His pink dress shirt wrinkled with nervous sweat during recorded interviews where he defended his gate as necessary security infrastructure while claiming ignorance about emergency access requirements clearly specified in federal codes, county ordinances, and his own development's insurance policies. His explanations about HOA authority superseding fire safety regulations, community security justifying blocked emergency vehicles, and his personal vision of suburban perfection being more important than federal law were all recorded for prosecutors, who would play his confessions during trials that would send him to federal prison for decades. Every word Marcus spoke was evidence of his willful criminal intent disguised as community leadership. The civil lawsuits began immediately after the Henderson fire, with 17 families filing wrongful endangerment claims against Marcus, his HOA board, and every contractor involved in gate construction that had created systematic liability for preventable deaths. Attorney Sarah Chen, representing fire victims, argued that Marcus's deliberate obstruction of emergency services constituted criminal negligence that warranted punitive damages exceeding the value of his entire development. Marcus spent $2 million creating a death trap, then defended it while his neighbors' homes burned and emergency vehicles were blocked from saving lives, Chen stated during preliminary hearings, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone seeking justice for systematic endangerment. This case represents systematic endangerment of civilian populations for personal ego gratification that demands maximum legal consequences. The insurance companies serving Meadowbrook Estates filed their own lawsuits against Marcus for deliberately voiding fire protection requirements that had been conditions of coverage since the development's original construction, creating liability for claims that could exceed $50 million if structure fires spread through the subdivision's interconnected design. Marcus's gate had violated every provision of their emergency access policies, creating systematic liability that his pink dress shirt couldn't protect him from, while insurance fraud charges carried federal penalties and personal bankruptcy that would destroy his family's financial future completely. County prosecutors filed additional charges against Marcus for criminal conspiracy, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment with special circumstances involving potential mass casualties that demonstrated willful disregard for human life in favor of suburban security theater. Federal grand jury proceedings began in December, with prosecutors presenting evidence that Marcus's gate constituted domestic terrorism through systematic obstruction of emergency services designed to endanger civilian populations for personal gain. The charges included conspiracy to commit mass endangerment, fraud involving federal emergency management systems, and racketeering through organized criminal activity disguised as HOA governance that had stolen over $1 million while creating death traps. Marcus's pink dress shirt would be replaced with orange prison clothing while federal marshals seized his assets, his freedom, and his gate that had become evidence in the most comprehensive prosecution of HOA terrorism in federal court history, proving that suburban security theater becomes federal crime when it blocks emergency access and endangers human lives. The federal trial began on March 15th with media coverage that transformed Marcus's pink dress shirt into a national symbol of HOA tyranny and suburban terrorism. His image broadcast across every major network as prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of systematic obstruction, criminal conspiracy, and reckless endangerment that demonstrated his willful disregard for human life in favor of personal ego gratification and financial gain. His gate had blocked Emergency Access Route 47, violated International Fire Code requirements, delayed emergency response during medical crises, and created mass casualty scenarios during the Henderson House fire that could have killed dozens of families trapped by his security theater. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity and moral clarity. Marcus Whitfield spent $2 million of stolen community funds building a death trap, then defended it while his neighbors' homes burned and emergency vehicles were blocked from saving lives, all while wearing his pink dress shirt like a uniform of suburban terrorism. Marcus's defense crumbled under cross-examination that revealed his complete ignorance of emergency management principles, federal fire codes, and basic human decency that should have prevented his criminal enterprise from endangering hundreds of lives. Wearing a standard business suit instead of his signature pink dress shirt, Marcus appeared diminished and pathetic while prosecutors played recordings of him defending his gate during active emergency responses, his voice dripping with the kind of entitlement that prioritizes property values over human survival. His claims about community security and property value protection were systematically demolished by expert testimony showing how his barrier had endangered hundreds of lives while enriching his family through embezzlement and kickback schemes that had funded his monument to suburban paranoia. The jury watched Marcus's own security cameras capturing delayed emergency responses, heard his recorded statements prioritizing HOA control over human survival, and reviewed financial evidence proving he'd stolen community funds to build his personal fortress against imaginary threats. Fire Chief Rebecca Torres delivered testimony that ended Marcus's defense permanently, her professional authority carrying the weight of 30 years fighting fires and coordinating emergency response that had taught her the difference between legitimate security and criminal obstruction. Mr. Whitfield's gate represents the most egregious violation of emergency access requirements I've encountered in 20 years of fire safety enforcement, she stated while prosecutors displayed photographs of burning homes and blocked emergency vehicles that showed the real-world consequences of Marcus's criminal negligence. His barrier system was specifically designed to prevent emergency access during critical incidents, creating systematic endangerment of civilian populations that constitutes domestic terrorism under federal statutes that were written to prosecute exactly this kind of willful obstruction. Her professional analysis classified Marcus's gate as infrastructure designed to facilitate mass casualties while maintaining plausible deniability, testimony that made federal judges reach for their maximum sentencing guidelines. Dr. Sarah Chen's fire protection engineering analysis was equally damning, demonstrating how Marcus's gate violated every principle of emergency egress and apparatus access established by decades of fire safety research and paid for with the lives of people who died in preventable fires. This barrier creates multiple failure points that maximize response delays during structure fires, medical emergencies, and evacuation scenarios, she testified while reviewing technical specifications that showed Marcus's systematic planning to obstruct emergency services. Marcus engineered a death trap that prioritizes electronic security over human survival, then programmed it to maintain maximum obstruction during minimum life safety conditions when people need rescue most. His gate represents systematic sabotage of emergency response capabilities that could result in preventable deaths during future incidents that his criminal negligence has made inevitable. The financial evidence presented by FBI forensic accountants revealed the scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise, showing how he'd systematically embezzled HOA funds to build his gate while enriching family members through inflated contractor invoices and kickback schemes that had turned community governance into organized crime. Special Agent Martinez testified about discovering $1.2 million in stolen community funds, fake security assessments used to justify unnecessary spending, and shell companies designed to launder money through Marcus's brother's security business that had no legitimate capacity or bonded authority. This wasn't just obstruction of emergency services, Martinez explained to the jury, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd prosecuted organized crime for decades. This was racketeering, using HOA authority to commit theft, fraud, and reckless endangerment that endangered hundreds of lives for personal financial gain while creating systematic liability for mass casualties. The victim impact statements were heartbreaking and devastating, with Mrs. Eleanor Patterson describing 12 minutes of preventable suffering while her husband watched paramedics struggle with electronic locks and override systems that Marcus had programmed to maintain security when she needed rescue. The Henderson family shared their trauma from watching their home burn while fire trucks were blocked by Marcus's security theater, describing how his gate had nearly killed their children and destroyed their life savings for his personal ego gratification. 17 families testified about financial ruin, emotional trauma, and systematic endangerment that had defined Marcus's HOA presidency, creating a record of human suffering that made maximum sentences seem inadequate for someone who'd weaponized community governance against his own neighbor's survival. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison delivered Marcus's fate with gravity reserved for domestic terrorists and organized crime bosses, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd seen the real-world consequences of systematic criminal negligence disguised as community leadership. Mr. Whitfield, you systematically endangered civilian populations while embezzling community funds to build infrastructure designed to obstruct emergency services during critical incidents, she stated while Marcus stood in shackles, his pink dress shirt days permanently behind him. Your conduct represents a fundamental betrayal of community trust and willful disregard for human life that demands maximum federal consequences under statutes designed to prosecute domestic terrorism. The sentence was devastating and appropriate: 25 years in federal prison, complete asset forfeiture totaling $3.2 million, and restitution exceeding $15 million to victims and insurance companies damaged by his criminal enterprise that had turned suburban security into systematic endangerment. Marcus's gate was demolished by federal marshals using controlled explosives, creating emergency access while symbolically destroying his monument to suburban terrorism that cost $2 million and endangered hundreds of lives. Emergency Access Route 47 was restored to full compliance with federal fire codes, county ordinances, and basic human decency that Marcus had systematically violated for personal ego gratification and financial gain. The Meadowbrook Estates community was completely transformed under federal oversight and new leadership committed to actual governance instead of criminal conspiracy, with property values recovering as insurance companies restored coverage and families discovered they could live safely without electronic fortresses blocking emergency services. 2 years later, I stood where Marcus's gate had blocked my family's road, breathing air that smelled like freedom and justice instead of hot metal and criminal conspiracy, while Emergency Access Route 47 carried fire trucks and emergency vehicles without delays that could cost lives, proving that justice prevails over suburban terrorism when pink dress shirt tyrants forget that emergency access laws don't negotiate with HOA authority.